Rogan like visibly hesitates for a couple seconds. He's like, "Yeah, we're good." It's like this is the funniest thing I've ever accidentally done. Okay,
That is funny.
Okay, I'm here. Also, my stream is unmuted, so don't say anything crazy. Did I just miss a good story?
Hmm.
medium.
I had a dream. The reason I ask about Ben, I had a dream where I had this like nasty conflict. We just like hit it off. I met him and it was like it was just really bad. And I was just thinking, I was wondering, I was like, why? Like anyway, I'm
Where
pumped you guys are here. This will be really fun. So, Steven, if you're cool with going first, I flipped a coin and that's what it landed on. And yeah, ready to roll?
Jesus. Yeah, wait, hold on. Am I crazy? Did they change? How do you make the thing zoom like a grid instead of the showing the active speaker thing?
Oh, that's right. I think if they're on the top right, one of the corners will be a little icon that says view,
Oh,
and it'll have a bunch of little squares.
cool. Okay. Gotcha. Wait, hold on 1 second.
You guys are enjoying your summer? I can't believe it's like we're almost done with June. Like I feel like I like just started summer.
yeah,
Yeah, what, are you on summer break? What kind of question is that? I feel like I haven't heard that question since I was in high school.
If you're enjoying your summer,
Yeah, what the fuck am I going to do in the summer? It's hot. It makes my computer run worse.
does it
Humid.
really?
Too much sunlight. It's horrible all around.
Oh, summer is like my favorite time of year. I love it. Well, usually, but I'm trying to, yeah. So anyway, it's gonna be fun. Let me know if you're ready. And
Uh,
wait, what I should do, that's right. If you guys will do a quick sound test, if you can do a one, two, three for me, please. We'll start with you, Steven.
1, 2, 3. Hello.
Cool. And then Ben, please.
1, 2, 3. Hello.
Perfect. Okay. And let me just do this. Cool. So what I'm gonna do is just gonna start streaming just to see that everything is good. The connection should be good, like no problems yesterday. And then we'll be rocking and rolling. So
Just in case, I don't think it'll happen, but there's like a storm here, so if I get disconnected, it's because God hates me.
you got it. Let's see here. Main. Oh yeah, yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna flip these. Cool. Okay. Excellent. I'm gonna go on and do a cold open where I'll kick it over to you, Steven. So
Wait,
here I go. And
let me just rest from like,
yep.
give me like 39 seconds. Also, wait, what is our topic for this exactly?
Israel Palestine.
That's it. That's the topic. Israel Palestine. Just
Wait,
that.
do you want me to? I'm happy to go first if you want to kind of do it that way. I just said I didn't care, so he flipped a coin.
Okay. Ben can go first. Let me just refresh real quick. Hold on 1 sec.
Okay.
Cool. Can you hear that, Ben?
What? The answer is apparently no. I don't hear anything.
Oh, okay. I got this soundboard and it's like custom so you can like add your own. It's not fancy. It's but you can add anything you want. So like Undertaker's dong noise
Oh, that's
or
fun. Yeah,
just
I don't hear it.
oh, but it's really cool and
Have to
I'm
get it.
excited though.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm a huge Star Wars fan, Ben. Did you know that?
Did not know that, but I know it.
You know, not all the shows are great. I didn't really like Obi-Wan. I thought Boba Fett was better than people, were saying. Are you a Star Wars fan?
But you're like you're, I mean, I like the original trilogy a lot. I'm not I certainly didn't love the prequels.
I get that. But yeah, and remind me, you live in the Northeast, right?
No, no, it's legitimately confusing because I probably moved around a couple times since I met you. But no, I live now I live on the West Coast. I was in California for like the last year, and I'm actually down in Mexico for a couple months over the summer, but like just in Mexico. It's like if the border didn't exist, it would be absorbed into suburban San Diego kind of Mexico.
Cool. I like that. That
Yeah,
sounds fun.
yeah, no, it's nice. Um, get to have a little, I mean, I'm not like at it. I'm on like a hill overlooking it, but I've got a nice view of the ocean while we're talking. So I certainly don't hate that.
Hmm. Oh, I hear you.
Uh,
Oh.
Okay, hi.
Cool. All right. So what I'll do is I'll do that cold open and then I'll kick it over to you, Ben. And then I'll kick it over to Destiny after that. But yeah, thanks for being here, guys. This is fun. I enjoy this. And so here I go with that cold open in 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating Israel versus Palestine, and we are starting right now with Ben's opening statement. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Ben Burgis. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. So I know we have very limited time for these openings, but I just want to quickly sketch out why I don't think my country, which is of course also Stephen's country, should be supporting Israel. Not in general, and certainly not right now, while Israel is committing really jaw-dropping crimes against the civilian population of Gaza. I have a problem with the last several decades of U.S.-Israeli alliance because I think Israel is an apartheid state, and it's bad to support apartheid states. I realize that apartheid is going to sound like hyperbole to a lot of people's ears tonight. Silly radical leftist stuff. It's probably an exaggeration. But I think it's a simple fact. Israel has ruled over millions of West Bank and Gaza Palestinians for 57 years since Lyndon Johnson was president of this country without giving them citizenship. During some parts of that 57-year period, there's been some level of pretense that this was a temporary military occupation, not a long-term absorption of the territory. But now that pretense is long gone. Israel's current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said over and over again that there will never, under any circumstances, be a Palestinian state. In other words, we're never, ever going to leave, and we're never, ever going to give you guys equal rights. We're just going to keep ruling over you as rightsless non-citizen intervention until the end of time. That's the explicit policy. And of course, even decades before Netanyahu first took office, Israel was building cities of its own citizens on this allegedly temporarily occupied land. Between 5 and 10% of Israeli Jews, depending on which numbers you believe, live in West Bank settlements, about 500,000 people. And what there's been since 1967 has, in essence, been a single apartheid state from the river to the sea. Israeli settlers in the West Bank are considered for every legal purpose to live in Israel rather than living abroad. They vote in Israeli elections when they're accused of crimes. They're tried in real civilian courts, not military courts. Their Palestinian neighbors lack all of these rights. And that's the West Bank, where the form the occupation takes is positively soft compared to Gaza. Nobody is dropping 2,000-pound bombs on tent cities full of terrified refugees in the West Bank. Ruling over a huge non-citizen population for decades inevitably leads to a dynamic of dehumanization, where the inevitable resistance, some of which, to be sure, takes forms I find morally indefensible, is met with increasingly brutal forms of collective punishment of the entire population. So after the most extreme right-wing government in Israel's history took office a couple of years ago, 2023 was the worst year on record for settler pogroms against the non-citizen population in the West Bank. And at the same time, the US and Israel were pushing a strategy of regional normalization at the expense of the Palestinians, which would have taken away the last card Palestinians still had in their hands, which was the nominal solidarity of surrounding Arab states. And unsurprisingly, as the pogroms against West Bank Palestinians were happening and these diplomatic moves were playing out, eventually the more militant of the two main Palestinian factions responded with some atrocities of their own on October 7th. And since then, Israel has responded with atrocities against the entire population of Gaza the part of Palestine where that faction is concentrated, on an absolutely brain-melting scale. More children have died in Gaza in the last 9 months than in all the war zones in the world for years beforehand. Millions of people, that's 85% of the civilian population, have been displaced from their homes at gunpoint. That's not collateral damage. That's not an oops while you're trying to get to 30,000 Hamas fighters. That's not war as hell. What do you expect? That is, at the very least, ethnic cleansing. And even if I didn't have a bigger problem with my country back in an apartheid state, I'd certainly have a problem with it providing 2,000-pound bombs and diplomatic cover while it carries out crimes reminiscent of what Slobodan Milosevic did in Kosovo and Bosnia. And now I'm curious to hear from Destiny about why he disagrees.
Thank you very much for that opening. And we're going to kick it over to Stephen Indeed. Want to say, folks, if it's your first time here, I'm Dr. James Coons. I'm your host. We appreciate you being with us at Modern Day Debate. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're watching here or at Stephen's channel watching live. With that, we're going to kick it over to Stephen. Thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of this conversation is probably going to come down to disagreeing over actual facts of the matters about any of the claims that are usually levied towards Israel or Israel's treatment of Palestinians inside or outside of Israel. In terms of why the United States should support Israel, I think there are a host of good reasons. I think that Israel is a good trading partner for the United States. I think that Israel is, for all of its faults, of which there are a number to point at, I think that Israel is a beacon of democracy in the Middle East compared to every single surrounding country, very easily. I think that the standards of living that people in Israel, including the Palestinian citizens of Israel, enjoy, and Israel's adherence to things like rule of law, I think make it a special country in the Middle East, and I think that these are ideas and things that are worth championing for the United States. I think that Israel as an ally in the Middle East provides like a level of stability to that region, and it provides a good military entry point to the United States. It's good access from the Mediterranean to host ships, host I guess whatever else we would need to from that country. Hopefully nothing major in the future, but I think that Israel is also a key strategic ally in terms of intelligence that they collect on U.S. enemies, especially Iran. And I think that Israel probably serves as a good partner for countries like the United States in conjunction with Saudi Arabia against the Iranian axis of Iran and Syria and kind of Iraq. I think that if you care about rights of Palestinians that exist in Israel, I think that it's even more important for the United States to be seen as an ally for Israel, because I think that the United States has been an important partner historically for Israel to push them towards peaceful settlements of issues. Without the United States as a partner, I don't know if Israel would have the same motivations to even consider moving in those directions. I think that the United States also provides an important restriction on Israeli military actions. For some reason, people seem to repeat the rumor that they feel like Israel's army is not conducting itself in a way that's adherent to any rules of law. If you think that, you only have to look to the north, to the east, or to the south to see that there are far, far, far worse ways to conduct war that is probably standard for the region. And Israel very clearly operates far above and beyond any of the norms set by any of its neighbors, including the ones that they're fighting right now. And I think that without any kind of alliance with the United States, I think that I think that Israel would conduct itself probably in a far harsher manner, and I think it would be worse towards everybody in the region, anybody that you'd want to protect. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that opening as well. We're going to jump into the open dialogue. Folks, if you happen to have a question, you can submit it if you at me in the Modern Day Debate live chat. If you do a super chat, that pushes your question to the top of the list. And for this gentleman, shooting for roughly equal time. So if you can do me a favor, keep in mind that the other person will want to speak approximately the same amount as you. And with that, you guys kick it off. The floor is all yours for open dialogue.
Yeah, so I basically heard three kinds of reasons there. One is broadly pragmatic reasons that trading partner, intelligence, and one is frankly what sounded to me like a lot of whataboutism, that Israel, as bad as it might be, is at least better than other countries in the region or in other places. And then the third was in between, which was the leverage argument that if the United States weren't providing financial and military assistance and diplomatic cover to Israel, then it would act even worse. And I think that last one gets us to why I actually don't know that I agree that the disagreement is going to boil down to sort of fine-grained questions about the fact of the matter rather than inferences and underlying principles. Because it seemed to me that if, I don't know, China were sending massive amounts of military hardware to Russia for the war in Ukraine, and sometimes half-heartedly pushed Russia toward moderating some of their crimes or accepting temporary ceasefire details with Ukrainians. As a Chinese dissident, I don't think you would say that, yep, they should keep sending Russia giant bombs to drop on Ukrainian cities because they lose leverage with Russia if they didn't do that, right? And it also seems, next thing I'd say before throwing it back, that that on that on that general topic, even on a pragmatic level, it seems very implausible that Israel would be as able to hold out for as long as it has away from withdrawing to its 1967 borders if it didn't have this colossus in its corner providing it with military assistance, providing it with that UN Security Council. It does seem very plausible to me that that would that taking that away would make Israel less bold in what it does. But even if it doesn't, even if we can't stop Israel from doing a lot of what it does, then it still seems to me that it's better to at least not help them to commit these atrocities.
Okay, so I guess just two quick things. I really don't like comparisons for Israel-Palestine to other regions of the world because there are so many things that are disanalogous that it makes it difficult for any comparisons to hold any weight. So when we talk as a Chinese citizen for China supporting Russia, and then for Russia to, how would we feel as a Chinese person if we thought that China was holding Russia back, but they were still sending them weapons? It's hard to imagine that because Russia is the most aggressive player, in that entire region. So it's hard to compare them. If Russia was surrounded by a bunch of far more terrible Russias, then maybe that argument would hold water. But the fact that Russia is uniquely acting in a territorially aggressive way in Europe right now makes it a hard point of comparison to Israel and Palestine is the first thing. And then the second thing for without support, Israel would withdraw to the 67 borders, that military allies or whatever. That's a hard argument considering that we just said we weren't going to engage in whataboutism. But I would remind the audience that Israel conquered through those 67 borders without really having any foreign allies. So the idea that without foreign allies they would be pushed back, I guess it's possible. But they are a nuclear power. I don't know if that would be the case. To run down the three different reasons that we gave, I just want to make sure that we're living in the same world here. On the first thing, so we mentioned pragmatic reasons. You brought up the term whataboutism, and then we used the leverage argument. For the first thing, do we agree that there are pragmatic reasons for the United States to be allies with Israel? So pragmatic reasons might be things like they're good trading partners. There's some geostrategic advantage in having a harbor for the Mediterranean. It gives us access to the Middle East militarily. Do we agree that those pragmatic reasons exist and are real?
I think that there could be some pragmatic reasons like that are real, although I also think that the United States probably loses a lot from its deeply entrenched alliance with a country that outrages an awful lot of the world an awful lot of the time, particularly in the Middle East. But I'm honestly less interested in that one way or the other than I am in the general question of whether it's good to provide support to an apartheid state. And I know that you're going to disagree with that characterization, but I kind of laid out the case earlier.
Yeah, we'll get there.
For why the shoe fits. That B is engaged in absolutely massive destruction and displacement against its internal non-citizen population. I think that even if that turned out to be something that that had more pragmatic pluses or minuses from a pure national self-interest perspective, which I'm not actually sure that it does, but even if it did, that still seems like something that people of conscience should be against.
Okay, so I'm just going to return to the first thing.
Sure.
For the pragmatic reasons. Do we then agree? Not like there could be, but there are pragmatic. I think we either have to agree here, or we can argue this particular point. Do we agree? For instance, do we trade with Israel? Do we get military intelligence from Israel? Are these things that we factually agree on, or do we disagree here? Or
I think that those are both true, but I also think continuing down that would be pretty unproductive because remember that what I just said is that while I'm not sure that the pluses outweigh the minuses overall, that's not actually, I think, the ultimate source of the disagreement because if we went over, we went over all the pluses in excruciating detail and all the minuses pragmatically in excruciating detail, where we would still be left with at the end of all of that is, okay, if it's pragmatically good for the sake of argument, from the perspective of pure national self-interest, is this something that means that we should just sort of swallow all of the obvious moral objections to doing that, or do those objections still hold water?
Sure. So Nazi Germany could have been a good trading partner for the United States. I'm not saying that just because we trade with them, it necessarily means that, well, now you have to accept my argument. You could accept, for sake of argument, that, yeah, there are pragmatic reasons to be allied with Israel, but there are other issues that we have with the country that far outweigh any pragmatic gain. And maybe even down the road, maybe those become unpragmatic because of how much those like moral crimes, I guess, weigh against us and our support for them in the region, et cetera. I'm just trying to make sure we're like in the same universe right now in terms of like what we agree on. Do we agree, for instance, that we do trade with Israel, that we export things to Israel and Israel buys them from us? Do we agree that there are like concrete military things that we get, like missile data or intelligence in Iran? Do we agree that these are things that we get from Israel? There are pragmatic reasons to be aligned with Israel. Do we agree just in that one arena? It doesn't mean that that's it. That's the whole argument. There's pragmatic reasons, so we have to do it. But do we just agree that these things exist?
Again, I've got to say this is a really strange thing to press down on because I didn't make the slightest objection to any of that earlier, and I think I explained why I don't think that would matter if the pluses outweigh the minuses, and I also think that we're not probably in a great position to figure out if the pluses outweigh the minuses. To me, that's much less clear than the calculus about justice. But sure, do those particular pluses exist? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they do.
To macro out a little bit, when I have conversations on this topic, there's a lot of whack-a-mole that goes on. There's a lot of hopping between a ton of different things, and it's hard for people to actually agree like on any actual substance of reality of like what has happened. I'm just trying to hammer down these points so that we have some foundation of agreement. We could agree. We could have an agreement on the next two questions that I have, which is about the three things you brought up. We could agree on all three of those things and still disagree on conclusions. I'm just trying to see that we're in the same world, descriptively, reality. That's all I'm trying to do right now. There's no setup for a gotcha. There's no like, well, since you agreed with this, you have to agree with this. It's merely just saying that we like have the same factual foundation. So we do agree that there are pragmatic reasons to be aligned with Israel. There might be other reasons why we shouldn't be, but we agree that those pragmatic reasons exist, right?
Yes, I agree that we trade with Israel. I'm sure
Okay.
that there's military intelligence
Gotcha.
from Israel. I've never heard anybody deny either of those things.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
So,
So the second point that you brought up, you called it whataboutism, but it has to do with Israel being better than other places. Do you disagree with the fact that Israel is generally better in almost every measurable way compared to basically every other country in the Middle East when it comes to freedom, equal rights, democratic representation of people, standards of living, LGBT stuff, whatever? Or do you disagree with that? Do you think that other countries in this region can make a stronger claim to those things when it comes to the rights that the people are afforded or the representation of those people?
I don't think it matters. I think that the question, and this actually gets us back to, since I really do not want to get lost in this, right? This gets back to something you said a minute ago, where you said, "Oh, I don't really like comparing Israel to what's going on with Israel-Palestine to anything that's going on in other regions of the world, because of course there are lots of differences between regions." Like, yeah, of course there are going to be lots of differences between regions, but I think if you're thinking about general principles and you want to make sure that you're being consistent, you absolutely have to be willing to do those comparisons. So, to directly answer your question, look, I think if you're an Israeli citizen, I think that they are, you all do have more democratic rights than citizens, of various completely non-democratic Middle Eastern countries. I think that if you are a Palestinian living under Israeli occupation, in many ways you probably have less rights than a lot of people do in some of those countries. But I also think that if that's the thing that we're arguing about, we're not actually arguing about what matters, because it could be true that literally every single person in Israel has more rights than every single person in some list of countries, which you think are the only countries that we should bring up when we're thinking about Israel-Palestine because they're close to it. And it could nevertheless be true that the treatment of millions of Palestinians for the last 57 years does fall under any reasonable definition of apartheid, and that it is very, very bad, even in general, that we're aligned with this country. Never mind that we're aligned with this country right now at a time when it's carried out this systematic campaign of destruction of the conditions of normal life in Gaza, and it's displaced literally millions of people.
Okay, I agree that these can all be problems that can supersede any of the agreements that we have here. Again, to reiterate, I'm just trying to make sure that we live in the same world with the same reality. That's the only reason I'm trying to iron out these ground questions so that we don't hop back to them later and that we can build on whatever arguments we both have from here. When I said before, I don't like comparing Israel-Palestine to other regions or to other conflicts, it's because the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really unique. So when somebody says, well, would you allow this country to do that thing? And they invoke other countries with very dissimilar circumstances, I feel like there is a whole bunch of moral baggage that's being carried along from the other examples, and that's why I don't tend to like to compare those things. You would have to change those examples to make it more morally analogous. That's why I don't typically like comparing this conflict to other conflicts. But when somebody says something like, you said that it was whataboutism that Israel is better than other countries, well, I can compare directly the standards of living or the freedoms enjoyed by Israeli citizens, both Jewish and Palestinian, to other countries in the region. And sometimes I feel like people are either not completely honest, or they don't want to say that, or they don't want to admit that because they think it's ceding some other part of the argument. I would submit that it is incredibly clear that the citizens of Israel, whether you're Palestinian or Jewish, enjoy much greater freedoms, much greater rights, much greater economic opportunity, much greater educational opportunity, basically in almost every single conceivable way, setting aside the people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip at the moment, than any other Arab in any other surrounding country. I feel like that's almost impossible to contest, but it seems hard for people to give that. I'm just curious if you feel the same, or if you feel you can also say that well, sure, I guess it's true, but it's not really relevant to any of the arguments we're about to make. That's fine as well. But I'm just curious if you agree with that or disagree with that, or...
Yeah. So again, if the question is about comparison, and it's really important that we sort of keep track of the boundaries you put on this comparison, because I think all the action is going to be on the other side of those boundaries. So if we're comparing, sure, standard of living, rights, freedoms of Israeli citizens, Jewish or Palestinian, to people in just the countries that you're willing to compare them to.
To be clear, those are countries in the region, is what I'm saying.
Well, hold on though, right? I do want to, because you said a bunch of things. I want to make sure none of them get lost, right? So, because that is a much bigger disagreement that we're having here, whether only other countries in the Middle East get to be relevant, and I think that's a good way of not applying consistent standards to only take into account other countries in the Middle East. But yes, if we're only going to count other Middle Eastern countries, and we're only interested in Israeli citizens, then I think all of that is broadly true. I mean, this is, and I don't think that's a concession. I think that's just a separate point.
Yeah. None of these are concessions, by the way. I'm just seeing if we agree on these points. That's it. Yeah.
Sure. I'm just trying to make sure people can track how this relates to the original argument, right? Because this is a super common talking point, essentially the what about the Israeli Arabs argument against the kind of critique of Israel that I laid out earlier. And whereas if you stop just comparing the Palestinian citizens of Israel to only people who live in various dictatorships and monarchies nearby, and start comparing them to people, to minority groups in Western democracies, I think in many ways you do see significantly more, discrimination in the Israeli case. And we can certainly talk about that, but I think that that's a little bit beside the main point, because the two things that I said earlier, right, that I think that the reasons why I'm bothered by our country supporting Israel are the charge of apartheid and the charge of ethnic cleansing in the last 9 months in Gaza. And of course, neither of those are about the Israeli Arabs, right? Those are about Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza for the first one, and mostly Palestinians in Gaza for the second one. And it's true, right, that there is this population of Palestinian families who ended up on the Israeli side of the line after 1948, who were eventually, granted most of the same rights as Israeli Jews. But it doesn't follow from that. And I know you're not saying it is, but I really just want this to be clear for the larger point, right? It doesn't follow from those people not having been denied these rights on the basis of their ethnicity, that there aren't millions of other people in Greater Israel, right? Israel's existed since 1967, who are denied basic legal rights on the basis of their ethnicity, quite openly on the grounds that even while Israel is building cities full of its own citizens in there, even while a significant percentage of the Israeli Jewish population is moving there, very explicitly on the grounds that if we granted all of these people citizenship, then that would take away the Jewish character of the state. So we can't do that. So to my mind, this is a little bit like saying, yeah, you could vote if you were a black person in New York State in 1940, therefore, no one in the United States in 1940 was denied the right to vote because they were black. I mean, there are people who have these rights in Israel despite being Arab, but there are also millions of people who are denied these rights because they're Arab.
Okay, so to be clear, there is no such thing as denying their rights because of their race in Israel. We earlier said that there are some 2 million Palestinian, I think 20% of Israel's population in Israel proper are Palestinian Israeli citizens. Their ethnicity does not factor in here to their rights that are afforded to them. People that have rights in the West Bank or don't have rights in the West Bank, that is determined upon citizenship lines. And if you are an Israeli citizen, you are granted more rights, obviously, because you're a citizen. If you are a resident or non-citizen, you are granted less rights. Now, as to the the occupation, whether that's good or bad, or whether there are issues are there, is a separate conversation. Obviously, there are issues. Obviously, this is a situation you don't want going on for a long period of time. But I think it's important, especially for arguments we're going to do later, to note that the claim that rights are doled out based on your ethnicity is simply not true. That's the one part there. You said that it's not fair to compare them to minority groups, it's not fair to compare them to other people in the region, but we should compare them to minority groups in Western democracies. I think that when you're making any comparison on anything, you're always looking for the most like things to compare them to. Israel is a country that very much exists in the Middle East, and that goes along with everything else that is part and parcel of being in the Middle East, including the ways that your neighbors do combat against you, the ways that their governments run, the ways that they engage with you. The idea that we would compare Israel to standards that exist in Western democracies that aren't threatened by neighbors, that aren't under constant attack, that don't have to deal with the same issues that Israel deals with is a little bit naive, I think. It's an unfair projection of a Western projection of how we think a country should look to analyze Israel in that way. I think is a little silly. I can justify that later if we get into that. Okay, so going back to these three.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Real quick, because you were talking so much.
Yeah.
We can do this simpler, but I'm just trying to. It feels like you're trying to head off like every potential argument. I'm not even on the road to making an argument. I'm just trying to agree. When I gave my opening argument, you said that you could group my arguments into 3 broad categories. So I'm just seeing if we have a factual agreement on 3 broad categories. The first one was the pragmatic reasons. We seem to agree. The second one was that the Israeli citizens seem to enjoy more rights than other people in their region. Maybe not to Western countries. We seem to agree on that. And then the third argument you said was the leverage argument. Do you agree that the West has historically and currently provides leverage against actions that Israel might otherwise take if the West wasn't providing that leverage?
Okay, so I want to start out with the first 2 things you said, because I think they're really important. So one, you said that I was saying it wasn't fair to compare Israel to other states in the Middle East. That's not true. That's not what I said. I said that we shouldn't artificially restrict the comparison to other states in the Middle East. I think everywhere is fair grounds for comparison, although I think there's also some irony to saying that it's not reasonable to compare Israel to Western countries, because you should compare it to what it's most like, when of course Israel's self-conception and the conception of it that's pushed by its apologists in the West is very much that it should be thought of as the same sort of entity as normal Western democracies. But my view is that you should be willing to compare it to any other country. If you have this scale of how many, of what rights are denied to what people, for what reasons, how objectionable this is, I think just coming in ahead on that scale of various monarchies, military dictatorships, is not good enough to make it not troubling that the United States is supporting this country if it is if it is troublingly worse than normal Western democracies in some of these respects, right? So that's one point. The other point that you said right at the beginning when you started speaking just now is that you said that well, nobody is denied the right. Nobody is denied rights in Israel because, well, you used the word race. I think I said ethnicity, but whatever, because they're demographics, whether they're Jewish or they're part of some other group. And you used as evidence of that the fact that there are these 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel who aren't denied that. But this is my point about how this is like saying that because Black people were allowed to vote in New York State in 1940, therefore it's not true that nobody in the United States in 1940 was denied the right to vote because they're Black. Like you say, oh, this is about citizenship, so it's not about ethnicity, it's about citizenship. But my point is precisely that even as the West Bank in particular, Gaza is more complicated, although I think actually much worse in some ways. But even as the West Bank in particular was more and more integrated into the state in lots of ways, that again, 5 to 10% of the Israeli Jewish population lives there. This is treated for all sorts of purposes as being part of Israel. Nevertheless, millions of people there were not made citizens. And, Israeli politicians and Western Zionists typically are not shy about explaining the reason they could not have been made citizens, which is, oh, if we had made those people citizens, then there would have been too many people with the wrong ethnic group who were citizens of Israel, and we'd lose the Jewish character of the state. This is the argument that this is like, I have yet to meet the Zionist who's not 100% transparent about making that argument. So saying it's about citizenship, not ethnicity, I think kind of elides the issue that people are denied citizenship even as the land they lived in is for every other practical purpose absorbed into Israel precisely because of their ethnicity. On the three broad arguments you made for yes, real quickly, I know I've been talking for a while, I'll just say that on the pragmatic point, I don't know that we agree. I mean, my position was yes, of course. If you say, does the U.S. trade with Israel? Does the U.S. get military intelligence from Israel? Again, I've never heard anybody deny either of those two things. But if the question is overall, does the alliance between the U.S. and Israel, sort of do more good than harm for the U.S.? I think that's much harder to know. Although again, I'm much more interested in the questions of that alliance perpetuating fundamental injustices. And then finally, because you asked me a direct question on leverage, I think that you can find individual instances, certainly, of the U.S. Using leverage to moderate Israeli behavior. There's the famous incident about Ronald Reagan during the war in Lebanon, for example. But overall, is Israel more emboldened than not by having the most powerful country in the world give it a blank check of assistance, so that even questioning whether it's always going to provide that assistance is like a huge political third rail, and providing that sort of stable UN Security Council veto on its behalf? It does seem a bit implausible to me that having those things in place wouldn't make the Israelis bolder about picking fights with other people than they would if they did not have those things in their favor.
Did they have the UN Security Council votes in their favor when they took all of the land in 67? Or did they have any security guarantees from the West when they took all the land in 67?
Well, this is the, I think that the whether there was, that is the time that relationship is just really getting going. But if the idea is, okay, they were powerful enough to do this, or, bold enough to do this without that, those things in their favor. I've got to say that seems like it would strengthen my point, not weaken it, because if they started out, right, already having enough of an edge over their neighbors and certainly over the powerless and dispossessed Palestinians, that they were able to do these things way back in 1967.
Well, I'm just saying that I guess my argument is just that, like, in 67, they seem to, like, in 67, it seemed like they were emboldened to take so much territory, including the Sinai Peninsula. And it was, Carter's commitment to peace and him forcing Begin to actually take Sadat seriously, that Israel actually ended up giving back the Sinai for peace with Egypt. So it's hard to make historical counterfactuals, but if I look at the actual historical record, it seems like without U.S. support, you've got big expansion in 48, you've got big expansion in 67, and then with U.S. support, you've got Israeli shrinkage. They give back the peninsula, you've got peace with the country. So I don't know where this idea comes from that international support emboldens Israel to be more aggressive than it actually is, when it seems like Israel's most aggressive, most expansionist years were done when they had absolutely no international support whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do find that a little bit confusing, because I would think that your claim here, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, is that you think that Israel was under such grave threat in 1967 that they had no choice but to do that, right?
I do think that. Do you disagree with that, or do you think that's not true?
I think that it's. I'm not convinced that it is, but I also think that it's probably not worth litigating, because I think that that whether or not that's true has very little to do with the objections that I was making earlier. I think that this is a sort of fundamental disagreement, right? You said earlier that one of your reasons for thinking that it's bad, or it's misleading to compare the standards that we would apply to Israel-Palestine to the standards that we would apply to any other situation around the world, is that the history is different, and so that and that makes a moral difference. And my sense that the way things often go is you get a lot of very in the weeds discussion of the history, but I guess the bigger question I would just ask is, why does that make a moral difference?
Well, I think it makes a moral difference because we were arguing this third point about leverage, and you seem to make the argument that Israel, with U.S. backing, seems to be more reckless or more territorially aggressive than when Israel is without that support. That if we were to pull back that support, my counter argument is that if we withdraw support, well, then Israel has no reason whatsoever to acquiesce to any desires of the United States. And then when we consult the historical record, Israel's biggest years of expansion, which were 1947 and 8, and then it was 1947 and 8, and then 1967 seems to be when it had its back against the wall with absolutely no support internationally. But as support internationally grew, not only did they stop conquering territory, they seemed to give back territory in the form of the Sinai Peninsula. So I'm curious how we can make the argument. What is the argument that Israel has more aggressive means just because they're backed by the United States? I can't find an example of that in history. So how am I to believe your argument there?
Yeah. So I think that the example in history is the fact that Israel has been able to hold on to this territory from 1967 for the last 57 years, even as the vast majority of the world is opposed to it. It does actually seem pretty plausible that, just as you say that the United States gets things out of trade or military intelligence from Israel, that Israel gets all sorts of benefits from not being completely internationally isolated, and that if that were a real danger, that would be a factor in the calculations. I also think that there's some tension and how you're talking about 1967, because on the one hand, for the purposes of this argument, you want to use it as an example of Israel being emboldened because there was no moderating force. And on the other hand, you want to say that they were under such grave threat that they had no choice but to do that. And it seems to me that if you take seriously the idea that they were under such grave threat that they had no choice but to do that, it's not actually very good evidence that they were emboldened, in a way that they wouldn't have been if they'd had moderating pressures.
Well, but that was the entire reason why they took the territory that they did, because they felt like they were under grave threat. The Golan Heights were captured because they felt that Syrian artillery could strike into Haifa and Tel Aviv too easily. The West Bank was captured because of Jordanian attacks from East Jerusalem into Jerusalem proper, and because they also had some, I think, 10 miles from their hills to fire into Tel Aviv. And the Sinai Peninsula was taken because once Nasser ejected all of the UN peacekeeping forces and started to deploy his military across the Sinai, Israel felt like they couldn't fight any attrition-based wars against countries that had 10x the population. So in all three examples of the territory captured in 67, they were done explicitly because Israel felt like they had their back to the wall. And I think this is further evidenced by the fact that Israel only gave back the Sinai when Egypt gave them a peace treaty. So I think that it perfectly backs my argument up. I don't see any reason, again, I'm returning to, you keep saying that Israel's held territory because of help from the rest of the world. I don't recall much help in the first or second Lebanon war. I don't recall much help in the 48 or 67 war. I know that the U.S. replaced a lot of armor in 73 for Yom Kippur. In 56, the United States was a moderating force during the Suez War. Basically, I think Eisenhower told Israel to fuck off and leave, which they did. So I don't see any part, returning once again, I just don't see any evidence or any examples. Can you think of moments where Israeli military acted in such a way where they're like, oh, well, the U.S. is helping us here, in Lebanon, either in 2006 or in the 80s, or the United States or somebody's helping us here fight. I just don't think that this really happens. I don't think it's much of a factor in any of the Israeli history. I think that if anything, Israel is generally fighting with the United States, and the United States is trying to push Israel towards more peaceful things, if for no other reason, because it hurts our other